Welcome back, I'm that chemist, and today we're going to be deciding which PPE is the best. So I want to start off this video just saying that in terms of safety, it's important to be pragmatic. If you want people to adhere to safety protocol, people have to be persuaded. You have to use rhetoric and convince people that it is beneficial for them to wear PPE. If you just tell them, be the most safe all the time, without giving detailed examples of why, people won't believe you. And they'll take risks. And on this channel, I encourage people to take good risks. Not wearing PPE is not taking a good risk. It's lazy, it's reckless, and it's extremely short-sighted. So if you're in a lab and you have a safety protocol, follow the proper protocol. And if your lab doesn't have a protocol, take the responsibility and make one. Without further ado, let's get started. Why don't we start with lab glasses? So I personally love lab glasses. I think it's kind of dumb that when you go into biolabs that a lot of biologists won't wear them, but these don't provide as much safety as lab goggles do. If you're in a biolab and your lab wears safety glasses, let me know in the comments, because in my experience, biolabs don't tend to do that. Now, all it'll take is an outbreak of pink eye amongst bioresearchers for everybody to start wearing lab glasses. So I personally think lab glasses are S tier, even though they aren't necessarily the most effective in terms of protection. They're pretty good. I think because they look cool, they're comfortable, they're easy to take on and off, you're going to have really good compliance in terms of people wearing them. So compliance is an important consideration with all of these pieces of PPE as well. What does PPE stand for? PPE stands for personal protective equipment. There are other safety measures that you might have in a lab, such as good ventilation, a smoke detector, the ability to clean up spills. But this tier list is focused on personal protective equipment. So speaking of lab glasses, why don't we talk about these over glasses safety glasses? So you can get lab glasses that fit around a normal pair of optical eyeglasses. Sometimes people will wear glasses with these little sidearm covers, and these do not do a good job. If you're wearing these, or if your lab accepts these, it's time to change the safety culture, because these do not provide adequate protection. The over glasses safety glasses don't look too bad. If you're still not a fan and you find that they're cumbersome or they're fogging up weird or whatever, you can actually get prescription lab safety glasses. Now, you might be reluctant to buy a pair of these, but spend a bit of money. Don't be a nugget. Your eyesight is way more precious than the small amount of money you'd spend on a pair of these glasses. And if your boss is stingy and won't buy them, just buy them on your own. Just because they should pay doesn't mean that you shouldn't take care of yourself. The over glasses safety glasses are a little bit more annoying. I would say that they can probably go into B tier. This specific pair looks kind of cool, but in reality, most of the pairs that I've seen look pretty dorky, so you don't get a ton of compliance. I've worked in a lot of labs where normal safety glasses aren't required if you wear eyeglasses, but it's just better to wear over glasses safety glasses. Protect your eyesight, otherwise you may never see again. Speaking of never seeing again, why don't we talk about laser safety glasses? These are very important for protecting your eyes when you're working with lasers. When you're working in a lab or any environment that has high power lasers, it's important to protect your eyes. And oftentimes the laser safety glasses that come with your machine are not properly rated, so it's important to get a pair of laser safety goggles that are properly rated for the strength of the laser that you're working with. Make sure that they're certified by your local certification agency so that you can trust that your eyes will be safe. I think these look pretty cool. You know, nobody who has laser safety glasses is afraid to wear them because you look like a supervillain, but a cool one. So these are pretty awesome. I think laser safety glasses can go right into S tier. Now, lab goggles. Okay. So they protect your eyes, but they look kind of dumb. They are objectively safer than lab glasses, but they mess up your hair and they're kind of ugly. When I think of someone wearing lab goggles, I think of a first-year undergrad who doesn't really know what they're doing. Now, that being said, they're objectively better, okay? So lab goggles are better. Even though I'm going to give them a bad rating, they work better. So take it with a grain of salt that I'm not claiming that they're ineffective. I'm just claiming that they're ugly. We can put them into B tier because you still need to protect your eyesight. It's important to be able to see if you're working in the lab. But man, lab goggles are just so ugly. All goggles, to be honest. This is a perfect moment to tell you about this video's sponsor, Factor. Factor delivers fresh, ready-made meals right to your door. This helps you alleviate stress and saves time that you would normally spend preparing a meal. Factor's meals are approved by dietitians so that you can reach your wellness goals. Factor offers flexibility to meet your dietary needs with preference options so that there's something for everyone. If you want to modify your food preferences or skip a week, Factor makes it easy to do so. Some of their past menu options include potato leek mash and grilled chicken, red pepper queso chicken, or citrus mojo chicken breast. I can't help it if I like chicken. Chicken's great. Chicken is absolutely S tier. They even give you options for add-ons, like gingerbread spiced pancake or pistachio and raspberry cheesecake. That sounds good. Use my link or go to go.factor75.com and use code POGCHEMISTJAN60 for 60% off your first box. That way they'll know you came from here. I want to thank Factor for their support of this channel. Why don't we talk about respirators next? So this is your typical respirator here. This filters air for your nose and mouth, but it doesn't protect your eyes. So this is better than not having any breathing filtration apparatus. This can help filter small dust particles, some vapors that these cartridges are rated for, and some gases if you have the appropriate cartridge. So you can switch these out, but in my opinion, you're just better off to wear a full face respirator because then you're also protecting your eyes and you form a proper seal against your face. So the respirator, you look pretty cool if you're wearing a respirator, but if you've ever actually worn a respirator to get properly fit tested and everything, it's a bit of an ordeal. But, it is better than suffocating. So I think these can probably also go into B tier. But why don't we talk about the full face respirator next? So the full face respirator, it protects your whole face. You feel like you're Walter White from Breaking Bad. And the cartridges and filters are replaceable, but it also protects your eyes. So these are really cool. They allow you to work with chemicals that you couldn't work with without other proper ventilation. But most of the time, it's better to work with proper ventilation. Now, it gets really sweaty and gross, but I've worked for 3 days with one of these before when our fume hoods were down in our lab, and I would not encourage you to do that. If you're working in a lab and your fume hoods are down, stay home. It's worth waiting till it's properly safe to work in the lab. If you need to work, if for some reason you need to work, it is better to wear the appropriate PPE than to not wear it. So the full face respirator, it looks pretty awesome and it does a really awesome job protecting you. So I think this can go right into A tier. Now a dust mask. You might think, oh, there's no place for a dust mask in a lab, but you're wrong. Oftentimes we weigh out large amounts of powder such as silica or alumina, and you can get silicosis if you breathe in silica gel dust. So it's important to wear a dust mask if you're working near lots of fine powders, and it provides some protection, but nowhere near as much as a full face respirator or just a regular respirator. So it has a role. I think overall it provides little safety, even though it's rated for dusts. We can put it into D tier for dust. Okay, so earmuffs. You might be thinking, earmuffs? Why the heck would you be wearing earmuffs in a research lab? Aren't those only for construction sites? But no, they are not. They're really important in a research lab, especially if you're working around sonicators or if you're working in any other profession where you're working near ultrasonic sound. Just because you can't hear the sound doesn't mean it's not wrecking your ears. Ultrasonic is really hard for us to hear, but it's really easy for it to damage our ears. So it's important that you protect your hearing. Another case where you might have loud sounds in a lab, for instance, is if you have gas cylinders, sudden large bursts of pressure, such as a Dewar off-gassing nitrogen, something like that. It's important to always protect your hearing anytime you work near loud sounds. Don't be macho. Model behavior that you would like other people to repeat. If you want to make the world a better place, start with setting a good example. So earmuffs, they're easy to put on. They do mess up your hair a little bit, so you get a little bit lower compliance, but they're pretty good. I think earmuffs can also go into A tier because you're like, I'm doing the right thing. I'm protecting my ears. And then, hey, you'll be able to hear more. And if your hearing's working better, you'll be able to hear if there's a gas leak or something terrible, maybe. So wear your hearing protection. Next, let's talk about lab aprons. Lab aprons suck. They're super ugly. They provide minimal protection. And if you've ever been in a teaching lab where these are used before, even though they come in boxes that say they're disposable, they do not get disposed of. They frequently get reused. These are basically as effective as clothing, which is to say, I don't really know why these things exist. I think it would be better to just use lab coats that people can wash. Lab aprons are pretty bad. They don't provide that much protection. You can see your ankles are exposed, your arms are exposed, your face is exposed. Lab aprons suck. Lab apron can go right into F tier. Terrible, terrible apron. However, we have other things like a lab coat. So lab coats are cool because you look cool and then you get to be a little bit safer. It's like a shirt that you just get to wear, and it protects you from some spills and some exposure and burns and stuff. So it provides a layer of protection. One bone I have to pick is that most people don't regularly launder their lab coat. So there could be some added risks which we all ignore, which is surprising given that hygiene for surgeons improved in the 1850s. You know, that was almost 200 years ago. I don't know why lab coats sort of just get a pass. Maybe that's fine. Maybe someone should conduct a large study examining the potential presence of harmful chemicals in lab coats. I'm just saying that it would probably be better if we all washed our lab coats. Maybe that doesn't mean we take them home and launder them ourselves. Maybe that means they get laundered by our department. If your lab does this and you're surprised to hear that other labs don't, we need to get that word out and ensure that people start doing things properly. So the main bone I have to pick with a typical lab coat is they're usually made of cotton, and while they can be like quote unquote fire resistant, it's still cotton, so it's still going to be flammable. It's pretty good overall. Like, you get good compliance with people wearing lab coats. I think lab coats can go into A tier. The one thing you will see is oftentimes in research labs, sometimes people will just not wear lab coats. And again, don't be macho. Model the type of behavior you want to see other people repeat. Why don't we talk about a Nomex lab coat? So if you don't know what Nomex is the material that firefighters' uniforms are made out of. Now, it's what's called an aramid. An aramid. This is not some weird arachnid spider thing. An aramid is a class of polyamide polymers, such as Kevlar. And in fact, they even use Kevlar in the construction of Nomex lab coats. And that's just for added mechanical strength. So Nomex lab coats are cool. This brand in particular makes a royal blue lab coat, and you stand out like a really cool person wearing a fire resistant lab coat. Fire resistance, you know, it's a little bit better in case you get a fire on you, and that's pretty cool. So I think flame retardant lab coat can go right into S tier because you get to look cool and you get to be a little bit safer while doing it. Now let's talk about the Tyvek suit. This provides basically the ultimate protection that you'd ever experience in a normal lab. These things are disposable. They only cost around $20 a piece, so it's super duper cheap. Now, $20 a piece is still probably too expensive for most labs to use on a daily basis, but maybe not actually. If you think about the cost of chemicals you might be spending in a day of your research, it's probably at least half the cost of your salary in the average research lab. I could foresee a future where we need to wear Tyvek suits in the research lab, although I could also foresee a future where most physical lab work is automated. In fact, there's already some labs testing out fully automated procedures, so who knows? Maybe we won't ever get to a place where we need to wear these. Tyvek suits are pretty cool. I think actual chemists and research labs don't need to wear them too often, but they're used in a lot of other fields, so why don't we put it into A tier? So we have a few left here. Why don't we talk about shoes, closed-toed shoes? Shoes are important because they literally keep the world separate from your body. Shoes are super duper S tier, and it blows my mind that we haven't found an optimal solution for shoes, given the fact that everybody needs good shoes. Everybody who is living probably needs to wear shoes at some point in their life, and I'd think that we would have sorted out by now shoes that fit most people and are good for our feet and provide adequate protection from the world. An issue I often ran into when doing lab work was shoes that were glued together would just fall apart in the lab because of solvents. Solvents would dissolve that glue and the bottom of the shoe would separate from the sides. And so I would have to go out of my way to find stitched shoes. And this was a challenge because oftentimes runners are glued together. So it's hard to find shoes that are both cost effective for a grad student salary, stitched together, and are good for your feet. So shoes are really important. Shoes start with an S. Of course, they're going to go into S tier. Now, steel toe shoes or steel toe boots. These should probably be more common in labs than they currently are. If you're working in any sort of plant, I'm sure they have requirements for you to wear steel toe shoes there. You still work with stuff that's heavy in most labs that could fall and just absolutely annihilate your toes. If you've ever experienced one of these steel toes protecting your precious feet, your sweet, sweet feet, then you will appreciate the utility that these shoes bring. They're pretty awesome. I would say that if you have a pair of these and they're suitable for your environment, they're good, they're worth doing. Most of the time people wear them when it's mandated, and if you just have a culture where, hey, we have to do this, everyone will do it. So steel toe shoes, pretty good. Why don't we put them into B tier? Okay, now let's get into the rants about gloves. So we'll start with the disposable gloves. So nitrile gloves, they're just the best. Nitrile gloves are super convenient. They're really nice to wear. Now, the one thing that kind of sucks is if your hands are wet. Like, let's just say you've been wearing a pair of gloves and you take them off to put on another pair. Your hands are usually still wet from the sweat that made contact with the last pair of gloves. So you have to let your hands dry off. Otherwise, when you put your hands in the new gloves, they just kind of get stuck halfway through, and that's not great. They don't really go on properly, and they tug and pull on your skin. But that being said, they're really good as far as gloves go. In general, they have better chemical resistance, they have good durability, but sometimes you'll lose a little bit of your tactile sensitivity. Now, obviously this depends on the size of the gloves that you're wearing. If you're wearing gloves that are oversized for your hands, you're not going to feel too much. And if you're wearing gloves that are super duper tight to your skin, you're going to be able to feel everything, but it's going to be easier for you to rip them. So I personally really like nitrile gloves. They have a couple issues here and there. You know, you get that weird nitrile glove smell that will stay on your hands for the rest of the day, but they're pretty good. I think nitrile gloves can go right into S tier. Okay, now let's talk about latex gloves. So latex gloves are all right. One of the issues is people develop latex allergies, but they're still decent in terms of protection compared to vinyl gloves. They still allow you to have a sensitive touch, and they're really widespread in the medical community. They can be less well suited in terms of chemical resistance, but I would advise you to look at the hazards of the chemicals that you're working with to know whether or not your gloves are the appropriate gloves for those chemicals. Certain chemicals will be more appropriate for nitrile gloves, certain chemicals will be more appropriate for latex gloves, and certain chemicals will be more appropriate for vinyl gloves, even though I hate vinyl gloves. So latex gloves, they're all right. They're relatively cheap. I think they can probably go into like C tier. They're not terrible, but they could be better. Vinyl gloves. So they have a very low cost, but they also have a very low durability, and they're rarely useful for protecting you from chemical exposure. As I was saying before, there's certain chemicals that are appropriate to use with vinyl gloves, and you should always read about this when you're working with them. So unless you're trying to protect your hands from a sandwich, vinyl gloves aren't that effective. So I think vinyl gloves can probably go into E tier. Now, a hard hat, also known as an engineering hat. These are very useful in environments where objects can fall and collide with your dome, like a brick. Someone in the Discord was claiming that they were required to wear one of these in a pilot plant. I guess because there's just heavy stuff that could potentially fall in a pilot plant, I'm not sure. So there is a little bit of relevance in a chemistry context. I think hard hats are cool. If you're wearing a hard hat that color coordinates with your whole outfit, you feel like pretty legit. Like you see those lab workers wearing white hard hats and it's just like, oh, they're doing something important. They're pretty cool overall. You can't really have any sort of a hairstyle when you're wearing a hard hat. Since it's kind of hard and hard ends with a D, why don't we put it into D tier? So why don't we cover a face shield? So this face shield isn't a particularly effective one because it's literally just a piece of plastic with another piece of plastic, but it's probably still better than nothing. Face shields can provide protection against splashes, and this is the type of thing you might encounter if you're working with an acid bath or a base bath in the lab. I would say if you're working in a research lab around base baths or acid baths, that you make sure that you buy a face shield that's rated for the chemicals you're working with. If you're using something like this, which is just like a transparency and a headband, that's not going to protect you very much from chemicals, and it'll probably just block one exposure. Always use the appropriate PPE. So face shields, if you're using one of the proper ones, you get to feel pretty cool. You get to feel a little bit like an astronaut, but again, it messes up your hair and you get low compliance because it's just so laborious to put one on and then you're sharing it between people. Low compliance means that you're not as safe as you could be. So overall, I think these could probably be rated a little bit harsher. I think I'm probably going to put this specific face shield right into F tier, which is appropriate because it's for your face. So we have 3 gloves left. Why don't we start with the butyl rubber gloves? These are really good for washing stuff other than the loss of tactile sensitivity that you have when you're working with these. Oftentimes you'll see long butyl rubber gloves when you're working in a glove box. And here's a meme about working in a glove box all the way from home. Butyl rubber gloves are thick. They provide good protection against many chemicals, and they can fit over your entire arm if you buy sufficiently long ones. So these could be good for taking stuff out of a base bath, putting stuff into a base bath. My one complaint is that they often don't get washed off properly, and you might run the risk of getting some of the chemicals into the gloves and all over your hands, which is probably something you want to avoid. Overall, they're pretty good. I think they're probably like a B tier piece of PPE. They're not terrible, but they're pretty good. So cryo gloves. Cryo gloves are these special thick insulated gloves that help protect you when you're working with something really cold, like dry ice or cryogenic liquids, like liquid nitrogen. Oftentimes you can get away with any other thick gloves when you're working with cryogenic fluids, but it's still better to wear the appropriate PPE when the time comes. I think, again, the compliance thing is a bit of an issue, but it is just a glove that you can slip on, so it's not too bad. The other issue I have is because this has like a big opening, if you can get some liquid nitrogen in there, you could still like freeze your fingers off, right? So if somehow you get liquid nitrogen into the glove, it's basically just like a cup full of liquid nitrogen and your hands inside of it. So that's a little bit concerning, but overall it's still protecting you from potential frostbite. You don't want to get frostbite in the lab. So cryo gloves, they're okay. Compliance is pretty good. I think they can probably also go into C tier. Now, last but not least, we have heat-resistant gloves. I think heat-resistant gloves are a very pragmatic solution to getting burned. Now, my issues with heat-resistant gloves is they're pretty cumbersome. You have very low tactile control. So if you're trying to set up oven-dried glassware, it can be really easy to break your glassware or to still burn yourself by like touching yourself on your arm somewhere that's not protected. There's just issues that happen. So they're convenient. They're easy to slip on. They stop you from getting burned, which is good, but they do still have their issues. So I think overall heat-resistant gloves probably still get like C tier just because they're cumbersome and it's hard to set stuff up with them, but overall they're still pretty effective. So thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.